Hello and welcome and good morning to all our viewers. This is NDTV's rolling coverage of Budget 2022. Nirmala Sitharaman, who you can see there entering the Finance Ministry, is shortly, in about 2 hours' time, going to be presenting her fourth budget in Parliament, a budget that is going to be closely watched because of the context. Remember, we're just weeks away from crucial state elections, including in Uttar Pradesh. We're also just emerging, fingers crossed, from the third wave of the Corona pandemic. And so is this budget going to be a kind of political booster shot which will address both the attempts to try to revive the struggling economy as well as address the political constituencies of the crucial elections which are going to vote, as well as try to see how the economy can emerge from the pandemic? We'll go across now to our reporters who are tracking the pre-budget mood on the street. And let's go across to my colleague Sohit, who is in Dalal Street in Mumbai, outside the Bombay Stock Exchange. Sohit, any initial indications of what Dalal Street is hoping or expecting from the budget?
Vasu, yes, they are expecting a lot. Well, we know that the Indian stock market has suffered a lot, a correction over the last week or so, and the concerns on the minds of the traders and investors were about the US Fed's policy decision and the tensions in Ukraine and the Middle East. However, over the next week or so, almost all the coverage of Indian financial media will be about the budget. So that is what we were expecting. And today, in fact, in the morning when I spoke to the several share market experts, they are saying that they are expecting a lot of things to happen over here. Although what we saw in the throughout the year is, even when we saw that there were two COVID waves that happened in India, the second wave as well as the third wave, most of the times the market was on the upper side. It was always rising. So that is one thing that they are expecting will be constant over here as well. As of now, the early trends will be available soon, and they are expecting that they will happen. In fact, AP Shukla, he is one of the financial expert as well as a share market trader. So what are your expectations from the budget this year? What are you expecting would happen as a trader? What will happen? What is the expectations of the share market?
There is 4-5 major point in this year for in the budget. How they are going to address inflation first, how they are going to address this crude prices which is going up and up, how they have to create employment to the public youngsters, and how they are going to address the corona challenges, how they are going to increase the consumption where job is created. These are the main focus area. And one more thing, how they are going to address the challenges of agriculture.
Correct.
So these would be the main focus area in this budget.
So what do you think is expected from the share market? There will be early trends that will come as of now. You might also be speaking to the other people. So what are your expectations? Will there be several announcements or something made? You talk about inflation, you talk about something to be done with agriculture. As a share market is, what are their expectations? What are you expecting? Will there be anything?
We are expecting, if government will discontinue the long-term capital gain, our market will boom, and the foreign investor more and more they will invest in our market, and economy will run. So that is our main focus. If finance minister is going to address this point, I think our economy will run fast, and foreign investor will also come and invest in India.
Correct.
More and
so
more.
As of now, there are several expectations from the budget, Vasu, and at the same time, they are also concerned about the rising inflation as well as how the job market will be created. So these are the expectations as of now, and it would be interesting to see that how does the share market, the BSE, reacts when it starts at 10 a.m. in the morning.
All right, thanks very much indeed, Sohit, there from Dalal Street, as the Finance Minister has emerged from North Block, from the Ministry of Finance, and this is of course all part of the traditional photo ops that we see before the budget. There she seems to be holding the budget document, so to speak, or the budget tablet in her hand, because remember, it was a paperless budget last time because of the COVID protocol. So earlier it was the Bahi Khata. As we know, she ditched the traditional budget briefcase, switched over to the traditional Bahi Khata, a book of accounts. And now it appears that this is going to be yet another paperless budget presented by Nirmala Sitharaman, and that of course is the Finance Ministry team that is assembled around her, all the different secretaries of finance, revenue and so on and so forth, as well as the ministers of state. So Nirmala Sitharaman there on her way shortly to present her fourth budget. Let's just go across to Yogendra Yadav is with us. He's of course Swaraj India, but also very closely involved with the farmers' protest. My colleague Alvind Gunasekar is also with us from Parliament. I'll come to him in a second. But Yogendra, just to bring you in first, as we see there Nirmala Sitharaman, setting into motion the countdown for the budget. Yogendra, it's quite likely that given the elections which are coming up, given also the concerns the government has, particularly over farmers, there is likely to be some addressing of that in the budget. What do you think should happen, ought to happen as far as farmers, agriculture is concerned in the budget versus what do you think is actually going to happen?
You know what, Vasu, I was watching your coverage earlier, and Dalal, the person who spoke from Dalal Street mentioned agriculture. I said, yeah, this is something. If Dalal Street talks about agriculture, we must be in for good times.
I noticed that as well.
You see, as farmers, I think farmers' expectations are three. I'll put it very simply: insaf, inam, or iman. Insaf, which is to say you're just due, because this is the first budget after an extraordinary historic farmers' movement. And the least the farmers can expect is that they would now begin to get their due share. What would that mean? Number one, legal guarantee for MSP. Number two, Manrega should have as much allocation as is its genuine demand, which is elementary. And number three, Prime Minister Samman Nidhi should be given not only to landowners, but also to sharecroppers, to the landless. That's the insaf part of it. Inam, which is to say reward, because as the economic survey itself acknowledges, agriculture is one sector which has kept this country up for the last 2 years. Despite COVID, despite downturn, everything else, agriculture has been up and up and up. And the farmers deserve at least some reward. What could it mean? Number one, the Kisan Samman Nidhi, which is paltry 500 rupees a month right now, can it be made at least 1,000 rupees a month? And secondly, on MSP, forget the legal guarantee. The reward would mean at least fulfilling the existing commitments of the government. The government of India has a scheme called ASHA, which is to give farmers, actually ensures that farmers do get the MSP which has been declared. And you know what is the current allocation? 500 crore rupees, while it's needed something like 50,000 crore is needed. So reward would mean at least these allocations should go up. Third is Iman, Vasu, minimum basic honesty and transparency. We must remember, and please do remind your viewers through the day, the 6-year period in which farmers' income was to double has come to an end this time. The announcement was made in the budget of 2016, and now this is the budget of 2022. 6 years are over. So the absolute bare minimum that we expect and wish is that the finance minister should come and tell the country, okay, 6 years ago we said we'll double your income. This is where you stand today. If I'm allowed to give you some statistics, Vasu, and I'm drawing it from economic survey from Government of India's own documents. According to Government of India, the farmers' income in year 2015-16, when the whole project began, was 8,058 rupees, about 8,000 rupees. What should it be in 2022? According to Government of India's Doubling of Farmers' Income Committee, it should reach 20,249 according to current prices. So it should be about 20,000. Where do they stand? If you go by the situational assessment that the economic survey quotes, and if you take all the projections about agriculture given by the economic survey, Right now, we are at 11,471. So, 6 years of a national mission, farmers' income was supposed to be double. It's actually almost half of what it was claimed. And if you go by farmers' income from cultivation, Vasu, it's actually reduced in the last 6 years. Can you believe it? And this is the period when it was supposed to go up. So honesty would require sharing honest picture with the country. Why is it that this mission failed? Why is it that the government did not even have a sincere tracker to tell us what's happening on this right now? And what is it that the government plans to do? Are they planning to extend it by another 2 years, 3 years? When would the income double and exactly how? So these are my expectations from the farmer's point of view.
Okay. Thanks for that, Yogendra. Don't go away if you're able to stay on. Do stay for a bit because I want to come back to you. Let me just go across now. We have, of course, my colleague Arvind Gunasekar is with us. Supriya Srinath of the Congress is also with us. Let me just go to Arvind first. Arvind, you're in Parliament. Arvind, is there now, because obviously this is going to be a budget presented in a political background. There are other political controversies which are also embroiling Parliament, like the Pegasus scandal and so on. What is the expectation that, is there going to be a sort of a uninterrupted budget speech? Is the opposition planning disruptions? What's the sense you're getting?
Yeah, well, so Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has already reached North Block with the budget, at least not papers anymore, it's a tablet. So she has already reached the North Block, and around 10:15 a.m. the cabinet is scheduled where the budget will be cleared in the Union Cabinet, post which she, along with the Minister of State for Finance and Finance Ministry officials, will be meeting the President, and then she will be briefing the President about the budget, and the budget presentation will start somewhere around 11 a.m. today. So what we are hearing from opposition parties are that today there won't be any disruption, at least from the opposition party side. What they are saying is that they will be cooperating with the smooth functioning of the Parliament, at least today when the budget is presented in the Lok Sabha. But what they are saying is that from Wednesday, that is from tomorrow, the opposition parties will be cornering the government on inflation and also on China intrusion and also very much on Pegasus. So there is a coordination among the opposition parties, and then what they are saying is that usually they have never disrupted with the presentation of budget, and then they will be continuing to do the same. But after the budget is presented, they will be taking to the people how this government has failed on each and every aspect, and then what they are saying is that they will be continuing the fight both inside and also outside the house.
All right, okay, inside and outside the house. Thanks very much indeed, Arvind Gunasekar. Let's just go across now to Supriya Srinath of the Congress is with us. Also, Ranbir Singh Pathania, spokesperson of the BJP, is with us. And also we have with us Jayant Krishna, who's CEO, Advancing Science and Technology Center for Strategic and International Studies. Supriya Srinath, just want to get your quick comments on what you make is of the context in which this budget is being presented, because yesterday the economic survey came out. As you saw, the government claims that growth has crossed pre-pandemic levels. It's now 9.2%, and they are basically making the case that this is economic revival and everything is hunky-dory.
So there are two things that I would say up first. What should the 4 pillars of this budget be? It has to begin with nothing but employment. It has to touch upon inflation. It has to touch upon the farmers and the rising income inequality. I mean, studies after studies are showing that how 84% of India is earning less than what it was. Wealth is concentrating in the hands of few. And this is consistently going on. And there is no mention whatsoever of that in the economic survey. The economic survey actually, while trying to protect the government, exposes what the government has done. If you actually read what the economic survey says on inflation, it goes on to say that the CPI has been below the WPI because of statistical methodology being changed. So there is an admission that
consumer price index and wholesale price index, just for our viewers.
Just for the viewers, yes. The consumer, the retail inflation, the price at which we buy things, it has actually been below the wholesale price index because the statistical methodology and of external factors. So there is an admission that the government has done precious little, and I think that's exposing the government. I think the other bit that I want to really talk about is unless consumption and unless investment doesn't revive, there will be no economic recovery. And just to point out the figure that you said, Vasu, at 9.2 or 9.5% that the government is claiming, please remember, we shrunk by 7.5% last year. So the real growth is barely 2% there. And this is important to put it in context.
Okay. All right. Let's just get a quick response from Ranbir Singh Pathania, BJP, that Mr. Pathania, what do you make of this, that while the government is going into this budget claiming the fundamentals of the economy are strong, growth has started to be restored to pre-pandemic levels, the fact is that unemployment is a serious problem, inflation is a serious problem, consumer spending is a serious problem. Isn't that something which the government will have to acknowledge in this budget and take steps to fix?
Yes. You are very much right, sir. Not only the Indian economy, but the international global economic order is in a tizzy due to this COVID-1, COVID-2 and COVID-3. But the heartening part remains that the Indian economic growth, by and large, you go and analyze direct and indirect tax collection.
Yes.
We go and see, we could say the crude oil, the Indian performance in crude oils.
Yes.
We go and see the overall, we could say the GST collection, the overall excise duty collection. The economy has almost come to that pre-recession stage. And let me be very clear and categorical.
That is because, as many people have pointed out, that's also because of a statistical anomaly that we crashed in the last quarter down to minus 7, and now we've come back up to 9. So actually our net growth has only been about 1%.
Yes.
So if we had not crashed, we would have been at a much higher growth curve. But I want to ask you very quickly before I move on, what about jobs, sir? What about unemployment? What about inflation?
Atmanirbhar with Atmanirbhar Bharat, with Atmanirbhar Bharat as the creed and the color of the Indian economy policy, and the last man in the last row, which constitutes the bedrock of the Bharatiya Janata Party's core ideology. We are over and over with disinvestment only, we could say, of only the sick PSUs, disinvestments, expanding the agricultural sector, reviving the services sector, and I am hopeful we will be able to generate more jobs, more pushing in, more spending in, and we could say a very vibrant and a very stable economic order which pegs the Indian growth at 9.2%.
Okay.
We be hopeful. The economic survey, a new approach, the agile approach, which has been adopted by the Bharat Sarkar, by the government of India, it will push India onto a new trajectory of growth, employment.
Actually, all right. I'll come back. Disinvestment numbers we'll put up shortly. The gap between what was projected in the last budget and the reality, by the way, is huge. Come to that in a second. But Jayant Krishna, realistically, everyone keeps talking about employment all the time, even in previous budgets. It's been raised. But realistically, what specifically do you think can be done in this budget or otherwise to try and spur jobs? Because that's one big area of concern. As the BJP's person said, tax collection, yes, has gone up, GST, etc., is looking fairly robust, but jobs, big problem.
Yeah, Vasu, unemployment position is not as good. Everybody knows that. I would feel the way PLI scheme was thought of for technology-led manufacturing sector.
PLI is production-linked incentive scheme, just for our viewers, yes.
That's
where the government gives you some incentive if your production is of a certain level, then the government gives you incentives, yes.
Correct. So that has largely been there for sectors in manufacturing which are technology-led. But, India's core competence has been in labor-intensive industries. I mean, nobody pays attention. For example, apparel, leather. And there's so many other areas where a variant of PLI scheme could perhaps do wonders at a time when the world over, the major economies and companies are looking at relocating part of their supply chain at destinations other than China because of geopolitical reasons.
Right.
So, I mean, even smaller countries like Cambodia, like Vietnam, like, Indonesia, they, even Bangladesh, they seem to have done well. But I think we could travel that extra mile, to attract labor-intensive investments in labor-intensive areas.
Yes, because that's crucial. Otherwise, how do you create jobs? Apurva Javadekar is also with us, Assistant Professor of Finance, Indian School of Business. Apurva Javadekar, how do you account for this? That on one hand, there's this huge gulf. On one hand, you see tax collections going up, you see companies posting robust profits. But on the other hand, you have this widening gap. There is, by all accounts, very worrying. Unemployment, people's incomes have shrunk, rural and urban. RBI data says that. The government keeps saying we announce packages, but the assessment is these are very, very kind of stingy packages. It's just simply not enough cash out. It's simply not putting enough money into people's hands. Do you think that's a big problem? And is that going to be addressed in this budget?
Thank you it's a great question. So just one statistic to begin with is that the demand for work under the rural employment guarantee scheme is not much lower than the last year. So people in the rural informal economy are still demanding jobs under the government scheme, suggesting stress in the informal economy. That's the first. So the only way, and I think panelists before me spoke correctly, that the only way the employment prospect will improve is through the Capex cycle. And as you see, private companies are not spending on their capital projects to a great extent. And so their government has to take the initiative. It's not that they have not taken. The capital expenditure is up in Q3 in Q2 last quarter, for example. But it needs to pick up even more.
Right.
And that's where the durable employment will start to kick in.
Okay. But why not actually start doing some form of a more robust or generous cash transfers? People have spoken of various models, universal basic income, so on and so forth. While, of course, job creation and all that is important, but that's a mid to long term challenge. Why not in an immediate sense start doing that?
So let me draw an example from US stimulus package, which was consumption driven, where government put money in people's bank accounts. So that led to a consumption boom to some extent. But after the stimulus was over, the consumption has faded again. Okay, so putting money in people's hand, when they are not sure about the employment prospects, is not going to bump up the consumption to a great extent. So I think the focus has to be on employment generation rather than putting money in people's hand. And government is doing that.
Why not both? Yogendra Yadav, what do you make of that? That is there a case to actually rethink this argument that you need to kind of step up cash transfers, as you said, widen the footprint of PM Kisan, perhaps other ways of doing direct cash support to particularly the poor and the underprivileged, rather than job creation?
As you said, I don't understand the rather than part of it. I think we need both. And the important thing is, I'm sure my economics friend would say, but where is the revenue? Let me mention one simple idea. If you were, and this is economic, business standard of this morning, which says that if you were to tax the wealthy people of this country, those who have own at least more than $1 billion, $1 billion. That's about, would be about 8,000 crore rupees or something of that. So if you were to put a wealth tax of 2% on those who have more than $1 billion in India, you know how much money would be generated? That's more than 1 trillion rupee would be generated by that tax. More than 1 lakh crore rupees would be generated. Why are we not doing it? So many capitalist countries in this world do it. And as you would remember, Vasu, some of the top wealth owners of this world had written a letter saying, please tax us. At this time, if we were not to do it, so that's what. And may I just mention one more thing?
Yes.
I've observed it in the case of this finance minister, that unfortunately her speech has nothing to do with the real budget. Every time it's such a tragedy. You listen to her speech and then you get the budget papers and then you try and match the two. And there's absolutely no match because the figures tell you a very different story.
Right.
And her speech tells you a different story. So I'm really hoping there would be some match. This is the elementary transparency that we need in budget speeches.
Okay, fair enough. I think last time when it came to things like food subsidies and so on, it was believed that there was greater transparency. But I just want to get a quick comment from Supriya before going to a break about this idea, Supriya, because this has been a Congress idea as well, this idea of Nyay, again, the idea of doing substantial cash transfers to the poor. But the argument that America did it, yes, consumer spending surged, and then after that it kind of dipped again.
You know, I just have to say one thing. I don't just speak as a congressperson. I've tracked about 18 budgets, Vasu, and I will say this with all honesty. There is only 101 economics that I understand, and that economics tells me that there is a virtuous cycle of consumption, investment, and job creation that has to be put back into motion. Unless and until consumption doesn't pick up, there will be no investments, and as a result, there will be no jobs. Please understand the Capex cycle and everything that everybody is speaking about. The government is a very minor player. The big Capex has to come from the private sector. Why will the private sector invest if your private consumption continues to be low? So consumption has to be boosted, and there is no way about it. And for that, you've got to put money in the hands of people. That is 101 economics, which the government seems to be in denial of.
Okay. Take a short break. Come back with much more of this. Welcome back. Counting down to Budget 2022. Let's go across straight to my colleague Sakshi, who is tracking the markets. What is it looking like, Sakshi?
That's right, Vasu. Well, markets have begun on a firm note on budget day. Both the benchmark indices surging 1%. The Sensex currently trading over 600 points, well above the 58,000 mark. Sectors across the board really trading in the green, with leads coming in from banking and financial stocks. However, it is important to note at this point really that markets have been volatile for the last 2 weeks. We did see benchmark indices tumble as much as 5% over the last 2 weeks. Remember, there was volatility due to the Fed signals of a rate hike and inflation concerns globally. So we can't really just negate that. Of course, we've seen optimism over the last 2 days. Today also, markets really hopeful of course, all measures coming their way as far as Budget 2022 is concerned. Now, what experts really believe, experts feel the sectors worst hit, such as aviation, hotels, trade, must get the much needed relief or the booster shot, as it were, this budget. So experts feel the aviation sector is looking at for an excise duty cut on fuel. Remember, the hotel industry is looking at a tax break or a tax holiday if it were this budget. So experts really looking out for those cues as far as sectors that are worst hit are concerned. We'll only know in time to tell Vasu how markets trade during the day. Experts really feel that only afternoon trades post the announcement is what we should watch out for.
All right, Sakshi, thanks very much indeed for that. We'll come back to you as you keep a close eye on the markets. Let's just go back to panel, and let's also welcome B. Thiagarajan is with us. He's MD of Blue Star Limited, which, as we know, makes air conditioners and other such products. And he is also chairman of CII Western Region. Good morning, Mr. Thiagarajan. Good to have you on. Mr. Thiagarajan, I want to ask you, and this is something we were talking about just before the break, that one of the things we're seeing is that there seems to be a pretty healthy uptick in terms of corporate profits, especially as the economy starts to return to normal. Tax collections have gone up, but companies are not doing enough capital investment. They're not expanding enough. I mean, to put it in simple terms, not opening new factories or expanding existing capacity. What is happening with Blue Star? First, my question is, are you seeing an uptick in sales? Is it going back to pre-pandemic levels? Two, what about expansion? Are you expanding?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to interact with you. I think there is a time lag between the demand and the investments in the capital. As far as the air conditioning industry is concerned, a PLI was announced. It was a well-designed one, and we attempt
Production linked incentive, right?
That is right. And a lot of investments are taking place. After many, many years, a record level of investment. In fact, the capacity will double from next year onwards. As far as the sales are concerned, it is at the pre-pandemic level. So from CII also, this is what we are advocating, that manufacturing competitiveness is an important element if we want to become an alternate manufacturing destination in the global supply chain.
Okay.
And
so in specific terms, if I can just ask you, you're saying overall there's been a surge, but if I can just ask you about Blue Star, have your sales reached pre-pandemic levels, number one? Number two, and have you also expanded?
yes, it has reached pre-pandemic level, and we are investing in a large plant in Sri City, which will be commissioned by October itself. So are our competitors. And for the first time in India, integrated supply chain infrastructure for air conditioning is being created. It will be truly world class.
I see. Excellent. So does that mean an expansion of, when you say you're putting up a new plant, so that also means new jobs?
100%. That's what I mentioned. PLI covers every aspect actually. It pushes for infrastructure creation. It provides a lot of employment in the sector as well as the allied sectors. And therefore, money in the hands of the people through employment and the consumption. So it is a cycle.
Okay, that's good to know, because that's the point, Jayant Krishna, who's still with us, that what you mentioned earlier, that you need to expand production-linked incentive to wider sectors. But overall, though, I mean, even with the incentives, even with tax breaks, remember corporate tax was cut several budgets ago, brought down to record lows. Why do we still see this hesitation from corporates from investing enough in expanding their capacities and putting more plants and creating more jobs?
So is the question to me, Vasu?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so see, fundamentally, Vasu, if you look at on ease of doing business, our ranking did improve from 100 plus to 63rd, but we have a long way to go. See, wherever we could deploy technology for online and time-bound approval or some process modifications, some improvements did happen. But still, when there is a human-to-human interaction between the government and the business, we have a long way to go.
Right.
If we are the 6th largest economy in the world by nominal GDP and 3rd largest by purchasing power parity, why shouldn't we be among the top 10 ease of doing business nations?
Right.
I think we have to look at that. Another thing that investors expect is certain degree of a regulatory certainty in the country. We keep changing our laws every now and then. I mean, there are a million mutinies waiting to happen. I mean, if you look at Land Acquisition Act, that has made the cost of land acquisition so high in our country,
so
and even the ease of acquiring land is difficult. Labor laws, if you look at the 44 federal laws and the state laws, they need a lot of simplification. Many of them have become outmoded. I think if you look at trade to GDP ratio, we are at a very low level of 37 to 38%, as against 56% used to be the trade to GDP ratio in 2011 to 12. Somehow we have become a nation of non-believers that trade can also create jobs, can spur investments. That's very important. We hike the import duty thinking that we'll protect the domestic industry, but actually what you end up doing is you promote poor quality products at the cost of high quality stuff. And
so
also you're preventing the export of value-added products using the cheaper imports, to reach international markets. Somebody has to look at this very, very holistically and have trade deals with the major economies like the US, EU, UK, and so on and so forth, including some of the FTAs. I think there has to be a reform centricity all across.
All across before you can expect this kind of expansion of businesses expanding. Investing more. But is that going to be a big challenge, Ranbir Singh Pathania? Because, as I said, with the context of the elections in this budget and with the context of a huge pressure in terms of jobs, particularly in states like Uttar Pradesh, what is really the hope or the expectation from the government when it comes to addressing that?
You see, on one side, we are focusing on growth. Elections apart, for us, country and nation and the global economy is the biggest bull which we are going to hit. Growth is the basic, employment generation is another part which we are going to focus on. If you have just a cursory look on the economic statement, which delineates on our forex reserves, which is on a very considerable position, we are in a good position. If you look at, we could say the performance of Indian forest area, we are at global number 3. if we look at, we could say on climate change part also, we are in a
no,
very
but
comfortable position.
Pathania Saab, the point
Sir.
is that those indices don't necessarily translate into more job creation, which is why
Sir,
when you see even for a lowly government job of a peon or a clerk, you will find lakhs and lakhs of young people who are on the streets.
Sir, with the focus, if we have a cursory look on the economic state, with the focus on pushing the growth in agriculture sector, pushing the growth in services sector, and the privatization, giving the stimulus, we are giving stimulus to employment generation, and we are hopeful the government will come out at 11 o'clock. This will be a big push on employment generation and big push on countering the
big push
business,
all right,
which will push the overall growth of the economy.
Okay, Supriya Srinath wants to come in. Yes, Supriya.
I just want to say one thing. We can keep quoting indices ad nauseum. We can keep quoting whatever statistics that we want to. The reality is that at this moment, economic recovery will happen if we incentivize small, medium enterprises. And without that economic revival, there will be no job creation and there will be no uptick in the Indian economy, because that's where the focus, that's where the job guzzling really happens. We can keep talking about big businesses. Corporate tax was stuck 2 years ago. What happened? Have they created jobs? Have they invested? No, they haven't. Because there is no incentive unless consumption improves. And which is why I think the focus of this budget has to be to incentivize the small, medium enterprises so that they revive and they start creating the jobs, because that is the backbone of the Indian economy. I also want to say one little thing here. We can keep talking about ease of doing business, something that I covered for very long, but let me tell you that's a statistic between two cities, Delhi and Mumbai. It doesn't reflect the reality of the country. And the reality of the country is that there is huge joblessness, and agriculture, where incomes were supposed to be double, average farmer is today earning 27 rupees a day. You really believe you've done great things for agriculture. So let's talk about agriculture, let's talk about unemployment, but without the focus on bottom of the pyramid, you cannot revive this economy.
Okay. What do you make of that, Mr. Tyagarajan, that while certainly it appears that at the higher tiers of the economy, companies, enterprises seem to be doing well, at least if you look at their balance sheets, there has been quite a hard hit by small businesses, and of course informal sector, the damage there, it's not even quantifiable, because you know the current statistical architecture often leaves those out. Do you think the government has done enough to throw a safety net to these sorts of businesses and enterprises down the line, or is there a problem?
I think the government has done well, but much more to be done. That's where I am. So, first I will clarify. The PLI schemes itself covers MSMEs as well. The smaller investment also are incentivized. But from CII point of view, of which the MSMEs are a very large part of our membership. So our demands are as follows: that implement the fund of funds scheme is one of our pre-budget memorandum requirements. And the other is that for the technology adoption for use in Industry 4.0, we are asking for incentive. We are repeatedly asking for credit-linked capital subsidy scheme, or the CLCSS, to be extended for technology upgradation. So the MSMEs are integral part of our growth agenda. Without them, we will not be growing at all, even in manufacturing. Okay. I also agree in agriculture. One of the demands we have is with regard to agri-infrastructure development. I'm not getting into MSP and other stuff that's being adequately addressed in your channel right from the morning. The important thing is agri-infrastructure investments also will benefit the agriculture and food processing sector. Okay.
Okay. But again, all of this needs money, Jayant Krishna, and does the government have money? They say that they do because of the fact that tax revenue, overall revenues, they're saying are actually up almost 67%, almost 70% basically year on year. So there does seem to be some extra cash in the hand. Do you think that is going to be spent generously this time? And if the government needs more, where is that going to come from? Because the disinvestment target, as we've shown, we'll put the numbers up on the screen again, way off mark. I think the target last time was close to over 1 lakh crore, almost 1.7 lakh crore. I think at the moment, they've only managed to post about 12,000 crores. So that's not going to be a big source of revenue. Where do you think that additional money is going to come from? Yogendra Yadav, who was there earlier, mentioned perhaps some kind of a wealth tax.
So yeah, I mean there is some buoyancy in the tax revenues, which hopefully would give some elbow space to the government to spend. Disinvestment, if you look at Air India's disinvestment, has been a step in the right direction, and we need to bring speed and higher velocity to that process. But fundamentally, if you look at, I'll go back to basics, Vasu. It's time that the finance minister addresses the three basic gaps in the way our economy is managed. I'm talking about allocation to education. I'm talking about allocation to science and technology research. I'm talking about allocations to health. In education, if new education policy has to see the light of the day, we spend barely 3% of our GDP on education. This has to go up to 6%. Healthcare, COVID really exposed countries' healthcare system, badly, and we spend just about 1.4 to 1.5% of our GDP on healthcare,
Right.
It has to go to 3%. Scientific research, we spend just about 0.7% of our GDP on R&D, vis-a-vis the developed economy spending anywhere between 2.5% to 4% of their GDP. And therefore you have very few, breakthrough inventions here. At least the vaccine development in the country showed the way.
Sure.
That, wherever you will take science and technology and research seriously, efforts, outcomes would happen, So I don't expect that on education, science and technology and healthcare, the entire change would happen this year, but at least the budget must signal some change. Otherwise, through a prism of timelessness, we'll keep blaming all the time, our poor ranking by way of per capita income, by way of human development index.
Fair enough. Ranbir Singh Pathania, before we go to a break, you want to quickly respond to that while the government keeps claiming that we are investing more in all these areas, education, health and so on, in real or in absolute terms, it's still not very much. It's quite low.
Sir, you are very much right, as very rightly has been pointed out by Mr. Jain. We need to prop up in the field of education. We need to prop up in the field of health also. And above all, in addition to creating more and more money avenues, we need to strengthen the Aam Aadmi. We need to pull out the people from the below poverty level.
No, so why doesn't the government do that?
In every village, we are focusing on it. I started my address, sir, that last man in the last row. This is the core ideology of Bharatiya Janata Party. We need to strengthen the capital spending. We need to strengthen the macro industries, but small and middle scale. We go to MSME. These are our main focus. We need to push
I'm saying,
the man
Pathania Saab,
who's working on Manrega part.
It's one thing to say, okay, it's one thing to say this is your ideology and you want to do it, but the other is to actually
we are doing it. Sir,
do it. I need to go. I need to move on. I'll come back to you.
National Livelihood Mission, Manrega, and
I'll come back to you.
Strengthening the Aam Aadmi, strengthening the Zamindar, the agriculture. This is a basic push.
Okay. Let me. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you and Supriya. Give me a second because Sanjeev Bajaj is with us, CMD Bajaj FinServ, Financial Services, also President Designate CII. Good morning, Sanjeev Bajaj. Good to always, as ever, have you on. Now, Sanjeev Bajaj, we're now fairly close, just about, I think, an hour before the budget speech. So just wanted to ask you as well something we've been asking other panelists, that while we talk about the expectations that the corporate sector and other sectors have from the budget, in terms of the corporate sector itself, this gap between, on one hand, we see tax revenues surging, indicating that corporates are doing fairly well. But on the other hand, there's still not enough capital investment, not enough new projects are coming up, not enough jobs are being created. How do you explain that?
Okay, let me take a stab at that, Vasu. One, capital investment, as you know, we are seeing enough green shoots of those coming from the private sector. We recently did a survey among some members, and over 50% are already engaging in various levels of capital investment. Now, this is going to take a few quarters by the time this actually hits the ground running. A lot depends on demand, and we know demand has been erratic. We have good months between lockdowns where we're seeing fairly strong consumer demand. There could be certain sectors that don't have it, but broadly, if you see it, that's why your indirect tax collections also have been good. So we need to make sure consumer demand stays steady. To do that, we have to make sure the pandemic remains in control. For example, this particular wave has been very well controlled because of all the investments in healthcare. But we have to continue working on that. use the right scientific advisors, but go ahead with boosters, go ahead with mix and match, get the next set of therapeutics in, anticipate change. You could get a bad strain coming. So anticipate the change, because only when the common man feels that his life is secure is he going to go and empty his wallet. So that's one. Second is, government has played a significant role in putting liquidity in the hands of the most vulnerable and MSMEs. Continue doing that, because we are not out of this pandemic yet. Continue the investment in infrastructure for some time. And as long as we keep things stable, the private sector investments are going to come. And once that comes, that's going to be a force multiplier. So that's how I would answer this question.
So just to ask you, very interesting things you said. I want to take you up on several of those. But just to ask you, Sanjeev Bajaj, on your own area which you work in, Bajaj Financial Services, what are you seeing in terms of the change? Are you seeing an uptick in terms of your own growth? And
so very interestingly, for example, if you see through the second wave, we saw rural India continuing to show very strong growth on consumption. Urban slowed down again through the lockdowns, but because the lockdowns were more micro-contained, it was much better than the first wave. Interestingly, in the last couple of months, rural has started slowing down for multiple reasons, and that's why one of CI's suggestions also is to continue with the Manrega scheme, give it more teeth going ahead, because it plays a very significant role. Urban, on the other hand, has come back. And we know that there are some sectors, like the lowest end of the economy buys cheap motorcycles, that is still down. We know that any product which has got chips, computer chips, those are down. But otherwise, we are seeing strong momentum. January is looking good. Even through this wave, we are finding that wherever we can get feet on the ground, we are seeing good demand.
Okay. But I do want to ask you, when you said that the government has done enough to put liquidity in the hands of those, particularly at the lower tiers of the economy, the poor, the disadvantaged, the counter view is that in terms of our own stimulus package or financial packages, the multiple Atmanirbhar schemes, these were amongst the stingiest in the world. The spending was barely 1% of GDP in terms of actual cash out to the government. Do you think that there's much more that can be done there, particularly, as you say, to stimulate demand, to break this cycle of low demand and therefore, low capital spending?
Yeah, so the challenge that we had as a country is we don't have a strong, large currency like some of the Western countries, or even countries like Japan, where they could spend a lot more than what we could. So we had to do it more thoughtfully. I was actually one of those people a year and a half back pushing the government to spend even more. But I must say that in hindsight, they've balanced this quite well. Now, I do believe something more on the consumption side could have helped, but I'm also encouraged to see that many months in the last 6 months, we are seeing very strong consumption numbers. So I believe that we are in the right balance, but what we have to be careful about is that there could be additional waves in the pandemic. There could be situations where the government needs to spend more. So they need to keep some of their gunpowder dry for some of these emergency situations.
All right. Okay. Fascinating. Well, we just are already seeing on the screen both the finance minister at Rashtrapati Bhavan, sharing a copy, presenting a copy of the budget to the president, and of course the traditional sight of the budget papers being unloaded at Parliament House in those large satchels. Supriya, as a reporter, would remember covering those on many occasions. So that countdown has begun, and but we have to take a break. And we'll come back with NDTV's rolling coverage.